Zach from Gravel Bike California, here at Let's Ride Cyclery, getting ready for the first LA Tourist Race of 2024. Now, if you're unfamiliar, there's no course, just checkpoints and books. You have to try and match your number and rip the page out and find your own way around. This leads to a lot of consternation on what type of bike you should bring, where you should go, and who you should ride with. Today I'm going out with Bill, Vic, and Sam, also along with my new bike. We'll see how everything fares, and hopefully this thing will come back in one piece. Let's roll. While there were a number of ways we could have approached the tourists, all 6 of our checkpoints were out and backs in some form so we can keep our climbing under 11K. Yes, you heard that right. Route discussions continued up until the start, fighting off 40-degree temps, seeing all types of bikes ready to take on these trails, as it was naturally standing room only, up until Mike gave final instructions, navigating a couple hundred cyclists, meaning it took minutes for the Let's Ride Cyclery parking lot to empty out, with the consensus heading north on Hollywood Way. But it was clear not all continued on past the airport, as our choice was to add a couple of miles circumventing extra climbing, and we had a fair number following suit on Glen Oaks, now down to wearing 3 layers 5 miles in. Time now to get into climbing mode, as La Tuna Canyon eases your way into it, beginning on the flatter ranch-friendly portion, then some gear shifting going into the mid-single digits as the shade from the Verdugos kept us cold, leading to where we'd have to wiggle 1.5 miles to the first checkpoint on La Tuna Canyon Trail. While we were humming off the start, this trail stuck to the edict, but there's no easy way up the Verdugos, exceptionally creating a conga line the first few switchbacks, with the middle section providing a steady sense of motion, looking like the trail just received some much needed love, as some of the views explain why. But there's only so much you can do with these tricky angles, and maneuvering around those who just got their first page, with this turning from a ride to a walk, as we still had a half mile to go, not expecting the bike to be so much of a crutch that we heeded to Troy's advice passing.
Thanks.
Leave your bike here, run the rest?
Yep. Leave your bike here, run the rest.
Cool. Bad thing.
Yeah, I think about stealing our bike here. With a 1/4 mile left, there was a strong case for flat pedals, as the core of riders that went up and over the Verdugos had a few minute lead, but also had to carry their bikes back further than us, even with eventual winner Hema Bachmann succumbing to the elements, though at least the book wasn't hard to find, as speed reading would do nothing to alleviate this line. Glad to acquire our first page in decent time, and even happier not having to carry our bikes back, as it was evident a lot more people took up the strategy after our drop-off, and even doing so at the 1 mile mark would have been better, with the squirminess of the trail tempering progress, as there was only so much space to fit the horde, and not laughing now seeing ditch bikes near the bottom. Continuing back up La Tuna Canyon, we still had 1.5 miles of climbing, starting a 10-mile stretch heading east all on the road, as the route we came up with had 50% more pavement than dirt, making up time rolling through Montrose. And even the pitchy climb following after didn't slow us down too much going up Hospital Hill, zooming the rest of the way down Foothill, ending in a brief stop, setting up us wiggling our way through the watershed, rolling along the border of JPL, full of the smartest scientists in the world not doing this ride, with a little rockiness worth the shortcut, as our security clearance shooed us over the Arroyo Seco, leading us into our mountain incursion. The start on the Gabrielino Trail is expeditious in surface and infrastructure, but our preferred path took us up the Fern Truck Trail with a decent amount of ruggedness working against the grade, making me shed yet another layer as we've made this nearly 3-mile climb to the junction many times before. Enough to know that it's more work than its stated 8% average, because we're like family up here, sticking together on the ascent, making it cleanly to the intersection where it's common to take a breather and, it's a Troy again. This segment to the Ken Burton Trail was the same length as the last, that generally profiled slightly up with a few short pitches built in, but I have been on this trail before, prior coming from the opposite direction and experiencing it at a different speed as a trail runner, remembering how this section was a reward compared to my plight to reach this coming up from the west, as it would be great if this was the norm for all of today's dirt. But this would change hitting our third phase to the checkpoint, having a half-mile on the Ken Burton Trail for the next book, and we heard someone suggest we should just walk, but Sam confirmed intel we'd be rolling, which, despite the occasional hiccup, was the correct play here, as it didn't seem to take us too long to roll up to the second checkpoint, with everybody approaching in an orderly fashion, as we were a little behind on schedule, but still on pace to finish on time. While continuing down Ken Burton to Gabrielino would have saved us 4 miles, we felt the better option for us was to backtrack, even with the little bits of climbing mixed in, and that we had to slow for oncoming traffic. It was still enough fun, worthy of a montage. We picked up where we left off on the Gabrielino Trail, weaving back and forth across the Arroyo Seco for what seemed like a short 3/4 of a mile, but the pathway soon began its devolution with water crossings at a low level, 2 patches of hike-a-bike, which I replaced footage with using these LA tourist fans, but we weren't much faster climbing Gould Mesa, threading this 1-mile cut to reach ACH that looks more efficient on a map, but averages a sturdy 10%, and even the pavement at the top was unfriendly, with the grade even tipping up to 17%, taking us nearly a half hour to reach the highway from where we turned onto Gabrielino about 2.5 miles ago, making a pit stop a couple of miles up into the Angeles Crest Fire Station. That was a popular refill stop for people in the know, getting back to the stable pitch up the highway. Glad we didn't venture down Ken Burton from the last checkpoint, thinking we'd have an uneventful 3 miles to our next dirt. But everyone has a plan until you snap your chain, meaning it was definitely reassessment time. Lucky that Sam had a master link to get me going. But if you're noticing closely that this looks like another stoppage at a different location, you'd be right, noticing the chain wasn't threaded correctly. And while we couldn't re-snap the master link, Armando and Justin stopped by, trying all the tricks to get it loose. But ultimately, we took apart the pulley to get me going. And thanks to part of Pomona's Mobbin' Monday crew, GBC was back in business, now needing to make up some time, as we lost about 40 minutes in stoppages with the chain, making our exit off the highway critical, heading towards Grizzly Peak up Hoyt Mountain Road, on a route that I'm very familiar with, but never done in this direction, meaning more climbing. And while the legs felt fine covering 3 miles of dirt to the checkpoint, it was more about how much the mountain would hold us back, as the middle mile was the most expeditious, with this section feeling like stretched out rollers. But as the narration suggests, it was back to climbing to get that book. Oh, and I don't just mean dirt, but over the occasional obstacle that lingers after fire season has passed, as the top third also tends to feel chilly, not getting a lot of sunlight this time of year, as reaching the checkpoint meant we were halfway mileage-wise, and we followed our compatriots, adding another layer. For 5 miles of descending, you'd think we'd make time up on. The first mile was just backtracking downhill, which would be magnificent if we could keep this pace. But luckily people were gathering around the turnoff to Grizzly Peak, which is easy to miss. As I was in "there's a first time for everything" mode, happy that mile 1 was flowing pretty smoothly, catching a few riders coming up the opposite direction, warning us for what we had ahead, as the trail started showing us warning signs that there'd be impediments ahead. Oh, and did I mention there'd be impediments ahead? Starting a trend on Grizzly Peak that we'd be spending more time off the bike than on, and that's if I could even find the trail that soon devolved into a slick downhill rock garden, which the suspension fork of my Lauf was handling better than others, but it got to a point where it felt like Weekend at Bernie's, where if anyone ever commented on wanting more hike-a-bike coverage, you got it, as it was all baby steps down to the riverbed.
Well, we've made it down to some type of creek. I don't know where the trail goes. I don't even know where everyone else is, so not hopeful. Get back before sunlight.
We had only 2/3 of a mile for the sedimentary adventure that, while smiling faces seemed encouraging, our movement wasn't just complicated by finding the trail, but having water with a healthy flow to cross, not just once, but at least 4 times by my count, navigating the upper portion of Big Tahunga Creek. And even when we were rolling, oh come on! Vic needed a moment at the campground after crashing on the descent, but glad that everyone around still had a glass half full attitude.
What are you doing?
Pretty good. I'm actually having fun still.
Really?
Yeah.
After a short climb out of the campground, we turned up Big Tahunga Canyon Road, where although this was a self-supported ride, Let's Ride Cyclery set up a pit stop with no complaints to fuel up at this point. Although spending over 15 minutes here underlined our level of urgency, but still ready to give Condor Peak a college try, as the western ascension to the main trail is 1.5 miles shorter than the east, which at 1/3 of a mile is probably still faster even though we never touched our pedals. But the riding picked up somewhat after the junction. You could tell more had been well curated on the flatter parts, though only so much progress could be made with riders passing, and some of the schematics meaning you could only do so much spinning. But I got a better sense why this trail is so beloved in the middle section, with the sunlight piercing through, revealing its beauty, which you can better feast on while it lasts, because the top didn't ask if to shed your bike, but when. Reaching the 4th checkpoint was more ceremonial at this point, as I'd have more success reading the page than making the 12-hour cutoff. Time to layer up as the elements were taking over.
Sun's going down. Not looking good.
We had no choice but to trudge on, seeing that there were many more still chasing that page, while we were in pursuit of that final sunlight that at least visually provided a lot of temporary upside, thinking I'd run into a stranded Matt Damon more than other cyclists, as it was clear our natural lighting was running on empty. Amazed how quickly it went dark on us, and how relevant my Blair Witch comments had become, where, yeah, I think we found road, as we decided half of 8 is enough for checkpoints, making a beeline back, realizing it wasn't the biking that was a holdup, but shortening our stops, even with the mechanical, would have given us a lot more time. As we covered the last 18 miles in under an hour as proof we had fuel in the tank, rolling smoothly back into Let's Ride Cycle Re, where we did our little check-in before checking out how our friends did. And whatever you say, this was earned. Even though it's a DNF, it's a success. Yeah, there was a lot of hike-a-bike, but hey, it's an adventure altogether. I think everyone out there was trying to figure it out, and kind of having to let go a little bit is part of the whole experience. Yeah, I'll definitely try this again, no matter how easy or probably hard this is going to be. Anyways, I'll support us. Go hit the subscribe button, or go to our shop or Patreon, so we can bring you more from the state of dirt.